It's pretty wild to think about, isn't it? How one tiny little strip of water, we're talking just 34 kilometers wide, could literally bring the entire global economy to its knees. Well, today we're going to unpack exactly how that could happen. Let's dive in. Just look at this number for a second, 21 million. That's how many barrels of oil can squeeze through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. It is a staggering amount. It's basically the lifeblood of our modern world, and it's all flowing through one very, very fragile passage. And this is exactly why you hear experts call the Strait of Hormuz a choke point. It's the perfect word for it, right? It's like a geographical bottleneck that forces an insane amount of traffic through this tiny opening. And let's be clear, this isn't just any choke point. It is without a doubt the single most critical one on the entire planet for our energy supply. Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine the huge oil reserves in the Persian Gulf are, the source of life-giving energy. And the global economy is the body that absolutely needs it to survive. Well, the Strait of Hormuz, that's the umbilical cord connecting the two. And if you cut that cord, well, the consequences are immediate and frankly catastrophic. So let's put some real numbers on that umbilical cord. Every day, a fifth of all the oil the world consumes passes right through here. That's a full quarter of all the oil that travels by sea. And it's not just oil. A fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas, LNG, makes that exact same journey. So you can see why, when this choke point is threatened, it's not just some regional problem. It's a full-blown global crisis. So what happens when it actually gets shut down? So what really happens when someone decides to just turn off the tap on the world's most important energy highway? Let's walk through the chain of events. It all went down incredibly fast. We're talking about the first weekend of March 2026. Coordinated attacks hit the absolute heart of Iran's leadership. Within hours, there's confirmation. Iran's supreme leader has been killed. The response from Tehran was swift and it was brutal. Iran's Revolutionary Guard kicks off a de facto closure. Now, that just means that without formally declaring war, they started using threats and direct force to make it physically impossible to get through the strait. And this was not just a paper threat. I mean, look at this. These are confirmed kinetic attacks. We're talking physical projectiles and drones hitting commercial ships, even port infrastructure. You see the Skylight tanker on fire, the MKD Viome getting hit off the coast of Oman, even a port facility struck by drones. The message was brutally, brutally clear. This area is now a war zone. Of course, the official world had to respond. The International Maritime Organization, that's the UN body that governs all global shipping, put out this incredibly stark warning. You know, when the Secretary General himself is telling all the world's shipping companies to stay away, you know the situation is completely out of control. The bottom line was, the strait was closed for business, period. But, and this is where the story gets truly bizarre. Remember that first tanker that got hit, the Skylight? Well, it turns out it was actually part of Iran's own shadow fleet, the secret network of ships they use to get around sanctions and sell their oil. So why on earth would Iran attack its own asset? There are really only two chilling possibilities. Either it was pure chaos, just tactical confusion in the heat of the moment, or it was a deliberate strategy to create absolute indiscriminate panic, attack everything, even your own stuff, to make everyone as scared as possible. Either way, the message to the markets was absolutely terrifying. And the immediate result? You guessed it, the very first ripple from the Gulf wasn't a ripple at all. It was a financial shockwave that hit the global markets with the force of a tsunami. Okay, to really get the market's reaction, you have to know there are two different prices for oil. You've got the spot market. That's the price for a real barrel of oil that you need delivered right now. Then you've got the futures market. That's a contract to buy oil at some point in the future. Think of it like this. If you're stuck in a desert, the spot price of a bottle of water is whatever someone is willing to pay to not die of thirst. It's driven by pure panic. And that is why the spot price for oil jumped an insane 10%, almost instantly. Refineries were desperate. But the futures market? It had been pretty relaxed, thinking there was plenty of oil in the world. It only went up 3–4%. The traders just hadn't caught up to the new reality. Yet. And then reality slammed into Wall Street. This quote from Goldman Sachs really says it all. That comfy belief that the world was just swimming in a surplus of oil was, in their words, buried. The entire financial model for energy for the whole year was thrown out the window in a single weekend. So what was the new projection? Analysts started warning that if this blockade kept going, oil prices could spiral towards this number, $110 a barrel. Now, to put that in perspective, before the crisis, the price was hovering around $60. This was a forecast for pure, unadulterated economic pain. And with the world on the brink, all eyes turned to one group for a solution. The world looked to OPEC+, the cartel of oil-producing nations, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia. Surely they could just open the taps and save the day, right? Well, their solution had a fatal flaw. OPEC+ moved pretty quickly to make an announcement. It was really designed to calm the panic. First, they agreed to a pretty small production increase, about 206,000 barrels a day. But more importantly, they reminded everyone that they were sitting on this mountain of spare capacity, almost 7 million barrels per day that they could, in theory, bring online. On paper, it looked like a really powerful, reassuring move. But that brings us to the real billion-dollar question, doesn't it? What good is all that extra oil if you can't actually get it out of the region and onto a ship to sell it? And that, right there, was the geographical trap. It's the fatal flaw. Almost all of that spare capacity from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, it's located inside the Persian Gulf. So if the front door, the Strait of Hormuz, is slammed shut, that oil is effectively trapped. Yeah, there are some pipelines, but they can only move a tiny fraction of what's blocked. OPEC+'s big announcement? It was an illusion. And with no easy fix in sight, the economic consequences really began to spread. All right, now for the final and, honestly, the biggest ripple effect, how a crisis that's happening thousands of miles away ends up hitting you directly in your wallet. So here's the bill for a global shutdown. That price shock immediately starts fueling inflation all over the world. And that puts central banks, like the US Fed and the European Central Bank, in a totally impossible position. They're basically handcuffed. They can't cut interest rates to help the economy because that would just make inflation worse. This creates the absolute nightmare scenario of stagflation. That's high inflation combined with zero economic growth, and it pushes the whole world right to the brink of a massive recession. To make this super real, let's just zoom in on a country like Spain, which is heavily reliant on imported energy. For nations like Spain, this shock isn't some abstract economic theory. It's a direct blow to their economy and to every single citizen. And this is what that blow looks like. This is what it feels like on the street level. Forecasters predicted that the price for gasoline and diesel at the pump would quickly surge past the €2 per liter mark. That is a crippling cost for families and for businesses. It's basically a direct tax on daily life, all imposed by a conflict happening far, far away. Military and economic analysts started modeling out a few potential futures, and let me tell you, none of them are good. We seem to be moving from what they call a selective blockade into a partial blockade, where the price could spike by up to $60 a barrel for months. And the worst-case scenario, a total closure, could add up to $100 to the price of oil and last for half a year. That would trigger a complete global economic meltdown. So, after watching this whole crisis unfold, from the first attacks all the way to the price at your local gas station, what's the ultimate lesson here? I think it really comes down to this one question. This whole event, the panic, the economic damage, the geopolitical games, it all just reveals the profound fragility of our global system. It forces us to ask, in a world that is so interconnected and so reliant on a few fragile choke points, what is the true price we're paying for our dependence on this energy? And more importantly, is it a price we can afford to keep paying?